In 1980, an album released that would change the landscape of heavy metal music forever. Blizzard of Ozz is not only an iconic album based off its own artistic merits, but also for the fact that it brought Ozzy Osbourne's career back from what seemed like imminent obsolescence, a fate worse than death. It also featured the discovery of one of the most beloved and recognized guitarists of all time, who was taken far, far too soon. But where are my manners? If you're new here, hi, my name is Taylor, and today we are tone questing for the Blizzard of Ozz tone from the legendary album Blizzard of Ozz. I already said the name. If you aren't familiar with this series, we are embarking on a journey, not only for the tone, but the lore as well, with a healthy portion of side questing. So if that sounds like a good time, you're in the right place. This tone quest is unique though, for a few reasons. The first being Ozzy's recent passing, which is why I wanted to make this video, as sort of a commemoration to the man's life and legacy. I'm not really a big fan of thoughts and prayers posts, so instead I write 3,000 word scripts. Number two, if we're being honest, the actual guitar tone on Blizzard of Ozz isn't that great by today's standards, but we are going to get into this more later in the video, and while I think it was really influential and makes for a great tone quest, the actual raw tone is pretty harsh, and if you heard it on an album today, I'm sure it wouldn't be as desirable as it was back then. And lastly, there's such a huge amount of lore with this tone, just keeping everything together is going to be a challenge in and of itself. So with that, let's get started. You may remember Ozzy from many things: pissing on the Alamo, biting the head off a dove, biting the head off a bat,
Sean's going, tell me it's real,
or getting his head bitten off by a bat.
Come in.
But the truth is, there are very few people, and I mean in the entire history of music, that are more iconic than the former Black Sabbath frontman turned solo artist turned Black Sabbath frontman again. Now, normally in these Tone Quest videos, we look at the bands and the albums that are iconic and try to rummage through the dumpster of the internet to see what kind of lore we can scrounge up about the production of the albums, the bands, and especially the guitar tones. It's kind of the point of this video. But how do I not make a video commemorating one of the most influential and iconic artists' careers after their passing? I mean, if I'm being direct here, it just felt weird making another one of these videos without honoring Ozzy's legacy first, who with Black Sabbath undoubtedly laid the groundwork for all the music that I've come to know and love over my life. And I didn't want to do some superficial nonsense for internet clout, like a thoughts and prayers post. I wanted to really take the time and absorb what may have been one of the most important, or at least one of the most interesting crossroads in the history of heavy metal. And by doing so, we get to pay homage to not only one legend, but two in the now 43-year deceased Randy Rhoads. You know, when I heard of Ozzy's passing, the first thought that I had was, wow, he and Randy are finally going to be reunited. I'm not religious. I'm not even superstitious or presumptuous. I don't believe in heaven, nirvana, or whatever, and I have no idea why this thought crossed my mind. I think I've just passively absorbed interviews or whatever media of Ozzy over the years talking about Randy Rhoads. He always had such high regards for him, and you could hear in his voice how much he really loved him. There's this episode of Ozzy and Jack's World Tour, whatever it was called, where Jack shows Ozzy this old tape that was recorded when Randy was still alive, and Ozzy hesitates to listen to it, and I think it just shows how heavy Randy's death weighed on him after all those years.
Randy Rhoads was a big part of my life, and he still is to a certain degree. I always think of him.
I just like the thought of these friends reuniting in the afterlife more than rotting in their respective graves. Maybe that's why. But either way, that's really what put me on the path to make this video specifically. And fair warning, this video is 100% going off the rails on a crazy train. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. But there's just too much lore to talk about here, and it's been so well documented over the last 40 plus years, basically the entire time that I've been alive, and I just felt like I should let you know what you're in for. Don't whine at me because you don't know how to use the chapters. It's all lined out below if you want to hear guitar noises. With that being said, I think the best place to start here is Ozzy's departure from Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath and Ozzy had tensions for several years, with Ozzy threatening to leave multiple times over creative differences, and while this in and of itself is a whole side quest that could fill a theatrical runtime video, my take on this is that the band was drifting into their more experimental prog rock phase, while Ozzy was skiing the slopes in the Blizzard of Ozz, or whatever the fuck he was doing in the late 70s. And while he would remain bitter about this break for several years, going as far to try to do everything he could to derail Black Sabbath's future career, like for example, there's this rumor that he and Sharon would call venues and threaten to pull Ozzy from the venues unless they blacklisted Black Sabbath. And also there was this cringe. We'll come back to this in a minute. I think this was the best thing that could have happened for him. Let's face it, late 70s Sabbath might have been given an unfair shake commercially, but it doesn't compare to the majesty of an early 70s Sabbath album. I mean, their self-titled album is arguably the event horizon for heavy metal music. And while I tend to think these genre shifts are slow and they happen over time, over several bands and several albums, it's hard to not point to this one specific album and band as the genesis for all heavy metal music that exists. And I gotta be honest, I think Ozzy leaving was not not only beneficial for his career, but for the music of Black Sabbath as well. Because while Ozzy was crafting Blizzard of Ozz, Sabbath was putting out Heaven and Hell with none other than Ronnie James fucking Dio, another rock and roll icon taken way too soon. Back to what I was saying a minute ago about Ozzy being bitter. The man hired a dwarf that he nicknamed Ronnie to hang from the rafters and kill every night just to spite Ronnie James Dio and his former band.
Like I use a midget, a dwarf, as he so correctly put me right. He's not a midget, he's a dwarf.
Say what you will, I know it was the 80s, the times were different. What was culturally acceptable in the 80s was much, much different than what is culturally acceptable in 2025. But at best, I think that this highlights that this feud was just based off of Ozzy's jealousy and bitterness, and that he was also pretty petty at this time in his life. Now, do you see why I said this was pretty cringe? And side note here, this is one of my top 3 favorite Sabbath albums of all time. I'm a poser, I know, but Dio slaps. But back to the man of the hour. Exiled from his own band and in a rut of depression, he did what any rational person would do. Take his earnings from the Black Sabbath buyout and binge on booze and coke. Luckily for Ozzy and all of us really, the then Black Sabbath manager Don Arden saw a business opportunity. Why have one cash cow when you could have 2? He sent his daughter Sharon to whip Ozzy back into shape and get him back to doing what he does best, biting the heads off small winged animals. Now, I've read multiple sort of conflicting things here. The Ardens were managing Ozzy prior to Blizzard of Ozz releasing, and Sharon had a strong part in getting him back in the studio, but also that he used the last of his payout from Black Sabbath to pay for the record. But Ozzy himself has historically said that he stayed out of the business end of the music, so, you know, I'm sure there's a lot more to dig into here, but we're just gonna move on.
You've got to be a businessman, and I'm not a businessman, you know. You know, I'm very fortunate to this day now. My wife is my manager. She knows the business, but I don't know the business side of rock and roll. I don't want to know it either.
The Prince of Darkness was back and ready to form the most kick-ass band he could, not only to get his life back on track, but to spite his former bandmates who had just released their 3rd highest selling album with their new vocalist. Say what you want, but revenge is a hell of a motivator. The Ozman picked up one of the 2 best up-and-coming LA guitar players in Randy Rhoads, the other being Eddie Van Halen, and began to write what would become a debut classic in Blizzard of Ozz. Blizzard of Ozz was recorded in Ridge Farm Studios in Rustport, England, and while you can no longer crank out a record here if you are an aspiring musician looking to lap up that Ozzy ether, you can book it for weddings if you're an aspiring groom and you want to lap up that Ozzy ether. It was recorded in a little under a month during the spring of 1980 and features some of Ozzy's all-time classics like Mr. Crowley, I Don't Know, and of course the song that lives rent-free in every Guitar Center employee's head, Crazy Train. Crazy Train is to metal musicians what Wonderwall is to that one guy who shows up at a party with an acoustic guitar. After the album started production that spring, it took only 4 weeks to crank out. It was produced by Max Norman after Ozzy booted Chris
Tangari-Des
for allegedly being drunk behind the mixing console. If that isn't the pot calling the kettle black. Now, one of the more interesting aspects of this album is that it was originally supposed to be released under the band name Blizzard of Ozz, but the lore goes that when the final pressing came out, Ozzy Osbourne was the featured name and Blizzard of Ozz was in smaller print below. The lore states that this was a decision by management to capitalize on Ozzy's name recognition and blah 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 blah, but I gotta be honest with you, I think there was some bitterness between Ozzy and drummer and bassist Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley. Essentially, and you will see this a lot through Ozzy's career, Ozzy and Sharon didn't seem to like giving out songwriting credits or sharing royalties. I mean, if you want some verification on that, just go ask Jake E. Lee. Ozzy would also go as far to have the drum and bass parts re-recorded in the 2002 reissue of Blizzard of Ozz and Diary of a Madman to avoid legal controversy with the original members since they were in a legal battle over songwriting credits on those albums. This lawsuit was initially dismissed, but later for the 30th anniversary, their parts were restored and they were paid royalties for their contributions. Even after that, they both still filed several lawsuits against the Osbournes as recently as 2022 by Bob Daisley. Lee Kerslake died in 2020. Rest in peace. Now, take from that what you will, but the point that I'm trying to make here is I think it was the Ozzy show from day one, and to grease the wheels, he and probably more likely Sharon went along with the band idea, and Ozzy would go to fire the 2 over creative differences and control over royalties and distribution after the release of Diary of a Madman anyway, but that's a tale for another time. But enough lore, let's talk guitars. The main guitars Randy was known for using at this time was a 1974-72 Gibson Les Paul Custom and a custom-built polka dot Flying V built by Carl Sandoval. The amp used on the album was a modified Marshall 1959 Super Lead, and it gets really hairy when you look into exactly what amp this would have been. A lot of people say it was a 𝗦ci, but I tend to think it was probably one of the JMP era amps that he can be seen playing live. This is even more confusing because a lot of people still refer to these amps as 𝗦cis, even though they have brushed metal front panels. In truth, I think that we are probably splitting hairs here, and just knowing it was a modded Marshall from that era is probably enough. These would have been really common at the time, especially among the heavy metal guitar players in the LA area. But it was also so common for these players to do these really secretive things with their tones, often having mods that would be hidden so that they could develop their own unique sounds. Even Eddie Van Halen was notorious for giving these false interviews in relation to how he achieved his guitar tone, but I digress. The mod done to this amplifier was most likely some sort of cascaded gain mod, but it could have just as well been a clipping mod, who really knows. Randy was also known for using MXR pedals, and on Blizzard of Ozz he was running a Distortion Plus into the front of his amp, and an alleged MXR 10-band EQ. The cabinets Randy used on Blizzard of Ozz, and this is important because in my experience, this is always the most important part of these tone quests, were two Marshall 4x12s, but not just any Marshall 4x12s. Randy would load his 4x12s with the now discontinued Altec Lansing 4178H speakers. These speakers are pretty unique by today's standards, and not only featured an 𝗦liche magnet, but more importantly, an aluminum dust cap. This is not common in guitar speakers today, and it's going to be a huge hurdle in this tone quest, but I have a plan, and again, we'll get to that. Now, luckily, when it comes to miking up the cabinet, there are some notes from an interview Max Norman did with Guitar World. His amp setup was a Marshall stack with two 4x12 cabs. We had Shure SM57s right over the voice coils on 4 of the speakers, 2 speakers on top and 2 on the bottom, catty-cornered. The center of the microphone was right on the voice coil edge on a tangent facing right at it. Then we had a Neumann U82 sitting about 8 feet in front of the stack at the top of the steps, and another U87 about 20 feet further back from that. Most of the time, all those mics would be mixed down into one track, but sometimes we'd print stereo tracks if we wanted to keep the ambience separate. See, list 1 is a Neumann U82, and I have no idea what that microphone is. I've put about 5 minutes into Googling. There's a KMR82, which is a shotgun microphone, which would have been appropriate for that distance, but I think this is just a misquote. I'm not sure what microphone was sitting 8 feet away from the cabinet, but I also don't think it matters too much, to be honest. The point here is that they were catching the ambience from the cabinets at 8 and 20 foot intervals. Put a pin in this, we'll come back to it. So knowing all that now, with this tone quest, I could easily go completely broke. I mean, most of the stuff I've listed is now classic and also very, very expensive to acquire. I do have some unfair advantages here though. I actually have a friend who has a modified JMP era Super Lead, so I'm gonna see if he'll be kind enough to let me borrow that. So I'm probably gonna spend a little bit of the budget that I have for this video here, and we don't have a sponsor today, so I have to be really tight with it. I do sell guitar pedals and NAMM packs on Obsidian Audio's website, and for all of you out there on a budget that don't have a friend that owns a JMP amp, I will add a NAMM pack on there if you'd like to have a digital version of this rig. The link is down in the description. I told Bryce he could borrow my Deliverance while I have his JMP, so I gotta get that thing out. Jesus Christ, man, the amount of time and effort that goes into making gear videos that doesn't actually involve plugging in and playing gear. You'd never know unless you did this, but it's actually very, very time consuming. There's a lot of like moving pieces and shit. Okay, Bryce just dropped off his amp here. Check it out, dude. It's that old Marshall JMP. So this is like a Super Lead, I think. That's the way this worked. This has been like a mid to late 70s. And it has a clipping mod here that was done in a really smart way, where you pull this out so that they didn't have to drill into the chassis or anything. Really cool. I actually thought he did the mod after acquiring the amp, but he told me no, he bought it this way. It looks like we do have, I don't know if it has a effects loop too, so this would have been done after the fact. And this, I don't know if this is just a toggle switch right here. This must be just to turn the effects loop on or off, I'm guessing. And then this would have been aftermarket too. You know, obviously they would have came hardwired. So, you know, it's had some things done to it. It's MK2 master model, meaning it has a master volume on it. Okay, so one of the potential issues with making this video is it could get very expensive very, very quickly. So if I was chasing this tone for full authenticity, I would need to buy 4 of these vintage Altec Lansing speakers. And if you can look, they have some on eBay. $424 for, these are, oh no, this is right. $424.15 for 2 of them on Reverb. That actually sounds like a pretty good deal. $65 shipping. These probably would have been the speakers I'd use. But the issue with buying these speakers is I don't want to spend a bunch of money on something that I will never use again because it sounds terrible. These actually look like pretty good condition for the 70s. But if you look at these speakers, look, they have aluminum dust caps, and I think that that is the primary source of what you are hearing on those albums. Now, tone is really objective, but I think when you listen to those albums, the guitar tone isn't that great. You can say it's great in the context of the band and in the mix or whatever, but I think more of what that tone is coming from is trying to be loud and be heard and have a lot of distortion to play these, like, you know, more crazy lead parts that Randy was known for playing. When he was in Quiet Riot, they would get in trouble for playing too loud just because his guitar was so loud. And I think a lot of that comes from these ear-piercing frequencies that you get when you have these aluminum dust caps. And let me show you something here to this effect. Now, the Altec Lansing was a vintagey speaker, and the reason that you would want that super bright sound is, you know, like for a chimey clean tone. And there is still a company that makes these types of speakers to replace them in vintage amplifiers. Now let's go to this website because I think it kind of proves the point that I'm trying to get to here. So we have the Weber Ceramic California 12. The speakers that Randy Rhoads would have been using were 𝗦ici𝗰𝗶𝗹 speakers, but I digress. These come with an aluminum dust cap. You can actually get them with a different cap option if you want. And it says down here in the description why. If you look at it, aluminum, very bright, almost piercing highs akin to vintage JBLs. Good for crystal clean, but avoid for even slight distortion. Do you see the point I'm getting to here? And I tend to agree with this statement so far based off of what I've just learned from doing the research for this video. But we will see here, I have a solution for this. We'll get to that next. What I do want to buy, and I do want to try and find a vintagey one, you know, not for any reason other than vibe, really. I don't think this is a crucial element in this guitar signal chain. I think the most crucial element is going to be that Altec Lansing speaker. You know, I want to do something here. I want to get something, you know, I borrowed the JMP. That's really cool. I don't have a Gibson Les Paul. I don't really want to borrow one, but I do want to buy something for this video that is a little bit vintagey. And since this video doesn't have a sponsor at this point, you know, I am on a little bit of a budget here. Now look, there's a MXR Distortion Plus on eBay for $600. This would have been what Randy was using, I believe. There's actually a studio photo that I saw of him, and you can see one of these clearly like up on the console next to him. Let's see if we can find one on Reverb, and then we'll go to the dumpster fire of eBay if we can't find anything here. Okay, vintage 1980, 139. It's not bad. We'll get some gut shots here. Looks pretty disgusting on the inside. Oh, look at the board. So this is definitely in the right era. Oh, look, a script distortion, $299. And it's in one other cart. Oh boy. God, maybe I shouldn't do this. I'm gonna go broke on this video. $355 in one other cart. 1997. That's not, I mean, I guess that is vintage now, but one from the 70s. I think anyone would be mad if I just did a DoD Overdrive Plus. This one looks like it's in pretty good shape too. So 1980. It's got the truck tires on the knobs. You know, the old truck tire looking knobs. It's that mustard yellow that the script was as well, but it has the block logo on it. Let's see if he takes my offer for $100. Now, what are we gonna do for the cabinet here though? Okay, Chop Tones has an IR, and this is the actual cabinet. It says Brit cabinet, tall fort, so this would have been a Marshall cabinet with these in there. So like, this is specifically what we're looking for. And Chop Tones, if you're listening, like, this is just way too much stuff. Very cool, thank you, I appreciate it. But I would like a light pack with like 12 IRs in it. You know, my one hesitation with buying this cabinet probably doesn't sound really great by today's standards. So I'm really curious to see like if there's stuff going on with these IRs that smooth out the top end and make it not sound so harsh and things like that. But there's only one way to find out. Okay, so one of the things that I've been struggling with this video is what guitar to use. Because I do have a Rhodes V, and I was like, oh, I'll just use my Rhodes V, but it's like blacked out, and it's just super metal. It has Seymour Duncan blackouts in it. But then I was scrolling through Reverb, and I found this guitar, which is a Firefly, but you know, it's a Les Paul shape with gold hardware and polka dot colors. It's kind of like a direct marriage between the two types of guitars that Randy Rhoads was using in this era, and it just seems like so on brand for this video. So I'm gonna buy this one. Let's do it right now. And it's only $367. So I think that with the IRs, we're talking about $407, $500 on this video, which isn't bad if you think about it. If you think about like all the vintage gear that I could be chasing and the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars I could be in debt. Bam, orders placed. All right, now we wait. Rough morning. I was up until like 3 a.m. editing last night. We're just curing the grogginess with a little morning Joe, but something cool showed up. So the first fella did not respond to my offer, but I found another one. I think this one's actually better anyways. So this is a 1975 to 1980 MXR Distortion Plus. So probably, you know, this is probably the one. But there you have it. In all its grime and glory. This is really cool, man. It's got the covers for the knobs, you know, like the truck tire covers. Look at this, it's still got the foam on the back. This thing looks like it's seen some stuff. No LED, no power input, obviously, so this has to be powered to the 9-volt battery. This thing weighs a ton. Let's weigh this thing. It's like, what are they used to make pedal casings out of lead. So we have, okay, 13 ounces. It's so small though. I don't know, maybe that's why it seems so heavy, is because of its weight relative to its size. I've got to open this up anyways to put the battery in, so we might as well get a gut shot of it. Can you imagine having to do this every time you need to change your 9-volt battery? Okay, and immediately we have this like disintegrated fuzz in here. I don't know if this came with foam in here or not, but I think people would have put this foam in here to kind of protect the components if they were like moving the pedal around a bunch or whatever, so it wouldn't like get jostled around or whatever. It's like basically having sand in here. I'm not going to take the time to clean all this out or anything, but you can see in here, you know, it's got like the vintage components. It's all kind of hidden by this disintegrated foam shit. So let's put a battery in here. Foam is part of the tone. There we go. This little minion looking guy is ready to go. Unboxing time. Ah, I hate this. Pet peeve of mine. I just don't like when guitars come in styrofoam cases. You know, it's just, they make a mess. And while I will most likely resell this guitar, and at that point this case will come in handy, at this moment, exactly right now, it's not fun. You know, this looks like brand new, basically. This is so stupid. Get funky. Riff on Raff. Okay, that's fine, I guess. That'll stay in this case forever. Unboxing guitars is fun, man. It doesn't matter if it's a budget guitar. It's still equally fun. Oh, yeah. So definitely, you know, it's obviously used, but it looks like it's in pretty good condition. And I mean, if that's not a vibe, holy shit, dude. Got another rubber band around the neck. A little overkill here. Maybe you've been doing too much riff-raff. Oh, yeah. Look at this thing, dog. If that is not the vibe we were going for, I don't know what is. This is kind of weighty, too. I don't remember the last one that I played being this weighty, but, you know, not all mahogany is equal, so it is what it is. In my experience, you know, they're pretty decent guitars for the money. I'm really excited to make this video now. I mean, I was always excited, but still. Luckily, I don't think I really have to do too much to this guitar. I'm going to do my due diligence and check everything. But, you know, I think it seems fine. This pickup is like really, really loose. To be honest, though, I don't know if it's going to cause any problems. This one's like that, too. I think that's just the way these are. Seems weird. Seems like it's rattling around in there to me, but I'm sure it's fine. When I was testing it out, I wasn't getting any like noise or microphonics or anything out of it. We'll check everything. We'll check the neck straightness. I just want to clean this up mostly and put new strings on it. That's a big thing because it's like a used guitar, you know, and yuck. So, yeah, let's do that. I'm changing things up a little bit here with the guitar setup because people were complaining that I was using fast fret for whatever reason. I bought this stuff, F1, it's just like a fretboard care kit, and it comes with this oil. You just drop it on the fretboard, and then it has a microfiber cloth, an abrasive side and a soft side. Use the abrasive side to clean, and then the soft side to kind of rub the oil in. No one's sponsoring this video. Again, this is just stuff that I bought to try out. And I also bought this like guitar clean kit. You know, we're gonna clean this guitar because again, just gross. Normally I wouldn't go through all this, but I figured I would in this case, so yeah. While I have the strings off here, let's measure the neck. 22.4 millimeters up here at the first fret. That is a chonker. In this neck's defense, it doesn't feel that thick, but it is a chonky neck for sure. And then they're 24.3 up here at the 12th fret. So, you know, take from that what you will. I would say that this neck's not uncomfortable to play, but that definitely is on the thick side for me personally. hell yeah. I think that's the only thing you can say when you plug into a rig like this. It just sounds like hell fucking yeah. We have this vibey polka dot Firefly plugged into the MXR Distortion Plus pedal that is going into this 1978 Marshall JMP era super lead. Now this has been modified with a clipping mod. So we're just gonna, it just makes more distortion. There you go. That's what you need to know about it. All that's running into this Boss 𝗦cie tube amp expander. I'm using the effects loop in this tube amp expander to run this EQ pedal. We'll use that if we need it. There's a few things that is really great about using a tube amp expander or any sort of attenuator in this case. Number one, I am taking the signal directly out of this, so we're capturing all of this stuff up here, and we can put an IR on it in post, which is gonna come in really, really handy because earlier, like I said, I don't have those Altec Lansing 4178H speakers, but we're gonna compensate for that with an IR. I am monitoring myself right now with this Marshall 4x12 that has creambacks and vintage 30s in it in an X pattern. I will put on the bottom of the screen what you're hearing, you know, for less confusion. Yeah, this is what it sounds like at pretty much noon. You know, I gotta be honest with you though. Something about this tone is just off. Hold on one second. Is this joke doing anything for you? Was this joke worth it? Disclaimer here, I'm not playing the riffs from the album, so if you are from a record label, these are not riffs from the album. I'm playing similar-ish riffs to the album because these videos get copyright claimed all the time. So hopefully you guys can understand that. That's why, but just, yeah, FYI. You know, this sounds really just, I mean, classic rock and roll to me. We don't have the MXR Distortion Plus pedal engaged yet. I know it's weird because there's no light on it, so you can't tell, but you just have to hear it. You know, I read somewhere that the way Randy had this set up was dialing the presence way down, the bass way down, the mid cranked, and then the treble somewhere around there. And that definitely sounds more in range. You know, that could be it. That could be the way it's set. I'm gonna turn down speaker volume here, and then I'm gonna turn up IR volume. That's the line out there. You know, it's crazy how much more the IR sounds like the album than this cabinet does in the room. I mean, I'm not super surprised by this. In every video that I've made like this, the cabinet or the IR is always such a huge factor in the overall tone. And this is definitely true here as well. You know, we're just gonna stick with the IR because I think that, you know, if you listen to the cabinet, the IR just sounds so much more there already. So we're just gonna stick with the IR. Glad I took all this time setting up this cabinet. It's actually okay. You know, it's vibey. Like, it matches the mood. Let's mess with the presence here a little bit though, because this does sound a little bit more mid-focus, which it could be right, but I'm just curious. Now, I have a feeling what's going on with this IR, and just call it a hunch, but you know, it's like a professionally captured IR from a well-known distributor of IRs, right? And probably what's going on is it's been tampered with in the studio, if you know what I mean. My guess is that if I had those speakers in this cabinet, there'd be a lot more high-end and it would be way more shrill, but that has been sort of tamed for the sake of making a commercially available product. Does that make sense? And I think just for that case, I'm gonna try and like just boost the presence for now. Now the other caveat here is look where I have the master volume. I have it really low. So let's turn that up and see what happens. You hear right about there, it just opens up in the mid-range a lot. Let's go, what are we here? We're at noon. Let's go all the way up and then we'll A-B with like the clipping mod. You know, by adding that extra gain and the master volume, what we're getting is we're getting the notes like more compressed, better for solos, definitely, which a lot of the tone on Blizzard of Ozz sounds like it was more geared for solos rather than rhythm guitars, if you know what I mean, but, you know, I digress. You know, it's really hard to not get distracted and just start noodling with a guitar tone like this. I need to do a reference check here real quick. Now, what's cool about the newer Blizzard of Ozz reissue is that there's actually like bonus tracks, and one of them is just like Randy noodling on guitar. So it's kind of nice. You have this included isolated guitar track. Okay, so one massive difference from what's going on there, and it's a little bit harder to tell in a mix, but you can really hear it on that you know, outtake track. There's so much ambience, and I'm just guessing that's from the other microphones. Another thing that I read that I thought was interesting and I want to bring up here, and this kind of goes back to the IRs sounding polished. I've read that the microphones on Blizzard of Ozz were like out of phase, which is why it kind of sounds really, I don't know, it sounds like, you know, thin. If the microphones are a little bit out of phase, you could definitely cut that low end by doing that, whether that was intentional or not. I don't really know. That might not even be the case. Who knows what's happening on that console? You know, the low end could just be cut on the console, whatever. But when you're listening to those isolated tracks, you can really hear a lot of like the body of the guitar, but a lot of it is coming through those condenser microphones. Like you can just hear the reverb in the room and everything. So how much of that is actually translating to the mix versus like these just raw guitar sounds, which I'm sure weren't really mixed. Why would they be? You know, I don't know. I just think it's interesting. Let's go back to noon and then let's pull this thing out. You can hear that mod is giving us like a little bit more, but it's not really a crazy amount. We're gonna leave it off for now. I think we're gonna be fine here. We really need to move on to the star of the show, I think. let's set this at noon actually. And then let's turn this guy on here. I think that's on. Okay, so very simple, just volume and distortion here. If we turn, and this is gonna be very noisy. I don't have a noise getting a loop. It's almost like too much bass. Let's just turn the distortion on. Jesus. It's wow, Jesus Christ. There's the chip pan that Ozzy was talking about. It's too much. I think maybe like that is probably better. Maybe less output and just more. You know, listening to it, there's still more like gain texture. It's gonna be so loud. Maybe this is why he was playing so far away from his amp when they recorded this. Like if you read the notes, he's playing really far away and monitoring himself with speakers because sitting next to it is ungodly loud. Okay, noisy as shit, but undeniably very inspiring, oddly. Listening to this tone, it sounds kind of like, you know, by today's standards, but very fun to play with. We're gonna try this 12-band EQ just for funsies. lowering up that low end a little bit, making it a little bit more top end forward. I think it's helping. Okay, I have some major takeaways here and a lot of questions, actually. And maybe you guys could help clarify some of those questions because it's way outside my wheelhouse, but I think it's very interesting. I think the Distortion Plus is such a massive part of this tone, and really, like, the texture. When you're hearing him pick and do these really fast lead sections, like, listen to this. This adds something. It just adds this texture that's really, really kind of unique. And I did read when I was going through this thing, and it was even in the description of this particular pedal, that the older pedals, you know, they're just built differently. You know, it wasn't PCBs and stuff. It was like, these are handmade. I don't really know. I don't know what the differences are between this Distortion Plus and the newer one, other than the new ones have an LED and they have a power input, so you don't have to use a 9-volt battery. You know, a lot of things that actually are really handy. I'm gonna turn this master volume down. I can just hear this fan screaming for the tube amp expander. You know, this probably wouldn't have been used. I'm assuming that his amp did not have an effects loop. Maybe it did, but this might have been used in the front actually, which to me would be like a lot. It'd be a lot with that distortion pedal. But using it in the loop, it's kind of nice to be able to cut some of that muddiness out of it because, you know, like I was rocking the bass pretty much all the way down. It sounded a little bit anemic, but the guitars sound kind of anemic on that record. And the last thing here, and this is a big, big caveat, there's some things that I'm just not gonna be able to recreate because I don't have a cabinet with those speakers. But if you listen to that recording, that amp sounds loud. It sounds really, really loud. It sounds like it was cranked up and away from people, because they would have disintegrated if they were next to it. And when you couple that with the double tracking and possibly mics being out of phase, there's just like, there's a lot of weirdness going on that makes it really unique. I want to try something here really quick, actually. I'm going to try playing. Hopefully I can overdub these and they'll be okay. If this doesn't work, you'll never see this part of the video. You know, just some overdubs can add like a 𝗦cie effect too. All of those things combined is probably a lot of what's going on the guitar tone on that album. You know, one of the things that I really appreciate about doing these tone videos is it gives me a reason to throw myself into these albums in a way that I just probably wouldn't do on my own. I was never really an Ozzy fan growing up, not for any particular reason. I think that I just missed the train. The Crazy Train. But regardless of that, I was always familiar with these songs. They've played so many times over my life on classic rock radio, and really going into Blizzard of Oz and all of its history gave me a deep appreciation for Ozzy and everything he contributed to the art of heavy metal. I mean, let's face it, Ozzy was one of a kind, and half the things that he did that made him so popular you would get canceled for today. Like, I don't think anyone's gonna bite the head off a small winged animal without getting protested by PETA anytime soon, you know what I mean? But even despite the controversy that brought him a lot of attention, it is undeniable that this man put out so many bangers over his career. And not only that, but brought his career back from the dead and ascended to heights that he previously hadn't achieved. That is a massive feat in and of itself. And when you look at Ozzy as the whole package, the whole shebang, he was one of the biggest entertainers in an era of rock and roll that just kind of doesn't exist anymore. And while it's sad to lose such a legend, it's amazing the amount of art that he put out over his career and left behind for us. And I think that most people probably felt the same way after his passing. You can see this in the fact that Crazy Train entered the Billboard Hot 100 for the first time ever after his death. And Mama, I'm Coming Home re-entered the charts after 30 years. And while the Billboard charts might not be the best way to gauge music's popularity anymore, it still means something. And the fact that all these people started listening to Ozzy again shows how influential he was to several generations of metalheads. All right, guys, that's gonna be it for me. If you like these videos, then let YouTube know by hitting the like button. If you really like what I do here, consider subscribing. If you really, really like it and you want behind the scenes and exclusive content, join these wonderful humans over on Patreon, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.